Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome back, everybody. Our next guest is also a podcaster, an award-winning podcaster. Tom Fox is the voice of compliance, having the only podcast network in compliance. The award-winning Compliance Podcast Network currently has 60 podcasts. Tom has won multiple awards for podcast hosting and producing, and was honored with a Webby for his series Looking Back on 9/11. He is an executive leader and at the C-Suite Network, the world's most trusted network of C-Suite leaders. And he is also a co-founder of the Texas Hill County Podcast Network. So, hey, it'd be quite the honor to introduce him to the show and to interview him. So it should be fun. So let's ask Tom some questions about podcasting and what the voice of compliance really means. Two, one. So, welcome to the show, Tom. It's good to meet an award-winning podcaster. And you said it said in the intro that you won a Webby. So,
well, I was actually one of the 5 finalists for a Webby. So, when they say and the nominees are, I was one of the nominees, but I didn't actually win it.
Oh, well.
So I'm close to the winner, but not there yet.
Yeah, I remember that one in a film festival that the nominees are, and we didn't get this one, but that's okay. But you didn't start out podcasting; you started out in another industry altogether. So,
right. So I am a lawyer by professional background, and I started a new law practice in 2010. I was laid up from a bad accident, and so the only time I left my house was to go to physical therapy, and the only thing I had on my hands was time. At that point in my life, I knew nothing about social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it. So I started exploring social media, and as a part of that social media marketing outreach, I started blogging. Well, a couple of years later, somebody emailed me and said, "Hey, let's start a podcast." So I started podcasting in 2012. And it was just a natural outgrowth from blogging.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. So, it says that you are also the only compliance podcast network. And what does compliance really mean?
Sure. So that's correct. I'm the only I have the only podcast network in legal and regulatory compliance. I started that in 2017. But compliance means the program that you have inside your corporation to comply with laws, whether that's a law about export control, anti-money laundering, trade sanctions, workplace violence, anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, whatever that laws you have to follow might be. And so I have been practicing law in that field, or started in '07, or maybe a little bit earlier. And so I mentioned I started podcasting in 2012, and so it was about compliance. And I got the bright idea, I'll start a network where we can shake and bake and slice and dice all forms of compliance because there are multiple forms. So that's what I did.
Okay. Well, because many people here listening, they're entrepreneurs. They have numbered or named corporations. So why don't we dive into that compliance just a little bit to
Sure.
understand the different ways we need to keep our businesses in compliance, keep the government off our backs.
Right. So if you're a U.S. public company, meaning you have stock listed on a stock exchange, that being a public company means you have to have a compliance program that's written into a U.S. law. But even if you're a private company, if you want to do business basically with anyone in the United States, you have to have a compliance program. And so, yes, it's a legal and regulatory requirement, but businesses see the value of doing business with other companies that do business ethically and in compliance. So it's now really business driven, but it's all kind of goes back to the same place. Do you do business ethically, and do you do business in compliance? And what I wanted to do with my network, as you said, Michael, it was to talk about not only the different types of compliance, but I love telling stories. And so I started thinking, what about Shakespeare in compliance? What about Star Trek in compliance? What about Sherlock Holmes in compliance? What about Star Wars in compliance? What about the MCU in compliance? What about sports in compliance? What about women in compliance? And so I look at compliance from all of those different angles and many, many more, which gives the listener the ability to listen to the one that interests them. Mm-hmm. June 1, I started, every year on June 1, I start a series called Trekking Through Compliance, which is, I do all 79 episodes of the original series of Star Trek. So Star Trek TOS started in 2017. My numbers in 2023 were twice what they were in 2017. And that's just repeating the same series. And so it's just crazy, people can't get enough of this. And this year I completely redid it. So it's a whole new series, but it's still every episode of the original series. Or as my wife said, this is just an excuse for you to rewatch this, isn't it? So yeah, you bet.
Hell yeah. Why not rewatch it? Hey, I have it on DVD myself, right? It was was one of the best Christmas presents I ever got.
Exactly. So I just like telling stories. And if you're an entrepreneur out there and you want to own your space, you can do that with a network. Mm-hmm. But the key is to be as niche as possible. So we had the chance to visit before we started recording this podcast, and you were like, I don't get it. I mean, who would listen to that? I'm like, well, there's a small dedicated group of people who that's important to them. So if you can find a very small, passionate, dedicated group and put out things that they want, you're going to be very successful. The other thing you can do, and this was I can't really say I thought of it. I can say I did it. And it's the following. If you want to own your space, and I mean own it, start a daily news show. And so I have the Daily Compliance News. It's 3 minutes of 4 stories, and people love it. It's, by far my most popular podcast.
Yeah.
And a guy asked me at a podcast conference. He said, I do a podcast on PTSD for Iraqi war veterans. I said, that's exactly the kind of news you need to talk about. Everyone who has that issue will listen to your podcast every day. And it doesn't matter what the stories are. You're just keeping them up to date. So whether you say the riches are in the niches, or go niche to go big, you can do that in whatever your space is. Don't say just I'm an entrepreneur. It's like, no, I'm an entrepreneur in housing, or I'm an entrepreneur in innovation, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. And then start a daily news podcast, and you'll own your space.
Yeah. Well, that is very true. Especially, there's a whole host of reasons why you want to do that daily news thing, from the Google searches to just putting that next episode up there on Instagram or something, right?
Right.
It shows how relevant you are, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah. So you do a daily news on compliance.
Exactly. So what were today's stories? Well, I mean, just look and I'll tell you. The Daily Compliance News for June 6, 2024. The Securities and Exchange Commission was closing a Salt Lake City office. The Wirecard boss lost his lawyer. A bank in England got in trouble for terrorist financing. And Toyota got raided in Japan. That's it. 3 minutes. And I just read the stories. I cite to the newspaper that ran the story. And that's it. And people absolutely love it.
Yeah. What about commentary?
I give a few words of commentary, but that's not the point of the news. It's just reporting the news.
Yeah.
I do lots of commentary podcasts. Typically, I have a guest, although I have one that's a round table where we have 5 people. So the news is a solo podcast. My Sherlock Holmes series is a solo podcast, and my Star Trek is a solo podcast. Mm-hmm. And literally every other series is commentary with me and someone else.
Yeah. Okay.
And,
go ahead.
And you want to know the even crazier thing? People emailed me and said, hey, we don't have time to listen daily. Could you do a weekend wrap-up of your news? So I take the top 10 stories I've already talked about during the week and do something called 10 for 10 on Saturday. And it's as big as any other podcast I have. It's just crazy.
Yeah. Well, people want the information.
Right.
And when it's something, I know you're in a niche and everything with compliance, but if your niche is something important to people, then they're going to keep tuning in, aren't they?
They are, and that's the secret.
Yeah. So how did you? Well, I guess you were a lawyer working in this area to begin with, so you knew that there was a need, right?
Right.
So, because that's one of the things is people, they say, oh, I'm going to do something, I'm going to do a podcast about this. It's like, well, have you checked to see if anybody wants that information? Is that?
Well, I mean, that's certainly part of it, but there's really a lot more and many more reasons to do a podcast. Number one, I get to talk to cool people like you. Sometimes I'm on your side of the mic, and sometimes I'm on my side of the mic.
Yeah.
But I talk to people in this field all day. Number one. Number two is you may want to show your subject matter expertise in an area. And frankly, there's no better way than, I think, through a podcast. and pick your topic and talk about it to show why people should buy or your services or buy a product from you. 3 is it is a great customer development tool or client development strategy. And by that, I mean, if I sent you an email and said, Michael, my name is Tom Fox. I've got this, I want to talk to you about a compliance product. Here's a scheduling link, pick a time. Maybe or maybe not, but probably not. You're not going to answer that email. But if I send you an email, say, Michael, I want you to come on my podcast and talk about yourself. Here's a scheduling link, pick a time. You're going to get a pretty good response from something like that. So if there are people you want to do business with and you can't figure a way to get an introduction to them, just have them on your podcast and get them comfortable with you. 1, everybody wants to tell their story. 2, the interaction you'll have at least gives you some sort of relationship with them. And 3, you can show your not simply technical mastery of podcasting, but also subject matter expertise in your questions. So, just like you and I had a, pre-recording call, we got comfortable with each other. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Realized we both had a lot of similar interests, although we came from very different backgrounds, and we said, hey, let's do this thing.
Yeah. One of them, of course, being Star Trek, Star Wars, and because, hey, who doesn't love a good sci-fi, right?
Right.
Well, and that leads into the whole thing about the story thing, right? It's like everybody wants to hear a good story. So can you craft a story
that people are going to be interested in? And I'll just give you the most recent example because it happened this week. I have one podcast. It's a commentary podcast about compliance with a friend. And he emailed me. He said, look, I want to talk about the Trump conviction from the compliance perspective. And I thought, well, that's going to be interesting. And this guy he's much more liberal than me. And I was just afraid we were going to go way off the rails. But we didn't. He kept it directly focused on compliance. He laid out the compliance violations that he saw and why or what companies could do to prevent some of those things happening in their organizations. It was incredibly professional. It was spot on for compliance professionals. And as he told me later, it was completely cathartic for him because he got to talk about it, show his frustration, but do it in a way that was professional. Yeah. So, and it was just a great story. And he framed it in a way that I didn't think, or I hadn't thought of. So I thought it was a great story. So anyway, there's lots of different ways to tell stories. And, if you want to talk about Star Trek, I'm your guy. So rock on, man.
Yeah, we do have a political podcast on my end of things, and the whole thing with Trump. That was an interesting thing because of how it was politically fueled.
Well, and so I'm a recovering trial lawyer, so I looked at it from the trial lawyer's perspective, and the prosecution told a very cogent, coherent story. The defense basically said all of it's lies, but they didn't frame it in terms of a story that the jury could relate to. And so I hope it's taught from, the trial strategy and tactics perspective.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, as a lawyer, you must be really good at, especially if you were an actual litigator. You said trial lawyer. You have to be really good at telling stories.
Well, I'm much better now through podcasting, but yeah, that's what I did when I was a trial lawyer, and that's what I do now. I just do it podcasting.
Yeah. It would be a natural fit because you're used to telling those stories, right? So
right.
How do you actually go about framing a story out so that people they keep their ear glued to what you're saying?
So I have two criteria and two criteria only for a successful podcast. Number one, how much did I learn? And number two, how much fun did I have? That's it. And the reason is there's a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk, or Gary V. And he's a famous entrepreneur in New York City. And if I am engaged, the audience can tell that in my voice. So they say in podcasting, people come for the guest, but stay for the host. And so if I'm learning something, I'm a subject matter expert in compliance. But if I'm learning something, my audience is learning something. But even more importantly, if I'm having fun, my audience is having fun listening. And, if we go down a rabbit hole on Star Trek, they're going to love it. And like, wow, Tom got somebody else going down Star Trek rabbit holes. Let's check it out. No matter what the podcast is. So if it's engaging and if it's informative and if it's fun, people are going to come back. And so I try to give them that, and that's how I judge the success of a podcast.
Yeah. So, let me ask you this on the Star Trek level. How many? Let's see. Have you met any of the actors? Like, well, of course, William Shatner is still alive.
But I have not met any of the Star Trek actors. I have met the son of Gene Roddenberry, a guy named Rod Roddenberry, who has a whole business around the Star Trek universe, and he's got several podcasts. So, but in terms of any of the actors, none.
Wow! But you met the son of the creator,
right?
Wow, that's an amazing thing.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah. We have up here what we call Fan Expo, and of course William Shatner shows up just about every year there because he lives in this area. So it's pretty. If you go, you're pretty certain to actually meet the guy. So it's pretty. He's a pretty interesting person. But to meet the originator's son, that's got to be a treat and a half to hear how Gene Roddenberry went about with the creations from his son's point of view. That must have been pretty cool.
Yeah, and I went by their offices. It's in somewhere in Los Angeles, and they had some of the original set from the original Star Trek. So I got to sit in Captain Kirk's chair and do all that cool stuff. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. That must have been. Because well, I just I can go all day about different things in sci-fi and everything. Is the original Trek your favorite?
Yes, it's the one I grew up with, and it's my favorite.
Yeah. It says something about the era that you grew up in too.
It does. You're right. I can still remember when the first one went on air in September of 1966.
Yeah, I was a little too young. Well, let's put it this way. I was born in October of 66, so...
Yeah, you missed the first episode.
Yeah, I missed
but you were for the October. Yeah, you were tuning in October. There you go.
There you go. And I kept watching ever since then, right?
So, there you go. Yep.
So you started podcasting one to fill the time, but it sounds like that the fun of actually talking to people and creating the story has kept you going.
It really has. And like I said, I get to talk to cool people all day, but professionally, what it's done for me, Michael, is I say that I can either connect the dots or I can see around corners. It's not because I'm superhuman. It's just because I'm talking to everyone. And I'm literally talking to the top experts in compliance every day. So I can put together these different things I'm hearing in patterns. So it's really given me, it's upped my professionalism in the compliance arena.
Yeah, but with that being said, in compliance, it's not a one size fits all, and it's not something that's ever going to be static, is it?
No, it's incredibly dynamic, always evolving, and you're absolutely right. What you need for a $50 million company is not what you need for a $200 billion multinational. Tom Fox law firm does not need the compliance that Walmart needs, and vice versa.
Yeah. So with that being said, but you understand why Walmart needs a different level of compliance than, say, Joe's Eatery up the street.
You bet.
So, yeah. Does being an international company mean that you also have to, because you have to be in compliance in every nation you're in, right?
Well, if you're a U.S. company, there's a U.S. law which says you cannot bribe companies outside the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that law. In Canada, you shouldn't get the name right. Well, it's a CFPOA. Canada has a similar anti-corruption law. So a Canadian company doing business in Mexico can't pay bribes in Mexico, and that because that violates a Canadian law. So simply because you're located in the U.S., if you do business outside the United States, you're going to have laws apply to you that are U.S. laws.
Yeah. Well, okay, you brought up I just thought of a really good example of this one, because it's a Chinese company, Yahweh, and they detained. Well, they detained here in Vancouver the CFO of Yahweh as she landed here in Vancouver, heading to Boston to go see her son. But it was on a mail fraud charge that the I think it was the U.S. attorney issued the warrant for.
Well done, Michael. Yes. So the Canadian government arrested a corporate officer of Huawei, a Chinese company in Canada, on a U.S. warrant. Mm-hmm. And absolutely. And it was alleging that Huawei had created or done lending or borrowed money from banks through fraud, because they said they were not doing business with Iran, and the U.S. government alleged they were. And I don't know why or how Canada got in the middle of this, but they did. But it just shows the power of compliance and what you have to watch for literally on a worldwide basis.
Yeah. How Canada got involved in it is there is a treaty or something that the Canadian federal government can impose or ask for the U.S. Government to serve a warrant, and vice versa. There's a treaty there between the two countries.
For a non-lawyer, you're incredibly well informed.
Politics.
There you go.
Like I said, we do a political podcast, and I actually had to get into some of that. And it's like, but with that being said, the reason why I bring them up is because there's also there were some arguments back and forth about how they stole technology, and in China there are no such things as copyright laws. In the U.S. and Canada have very strict copyright laws.
Right. So I, as part of my former life as a lawyer, I represented a company, and we had business with Chinese companies, and we sold technology into Chinese companies. And this was the first decade. This is 20 years ago. So, it's a while back. But we knew then China was stealing our IP. And that was just either that was a risk you accepted or a cost of doing business. So the answer or the business response or the risk management strategy, if you want to call it a business process was that the we would only sell them technology that was 2 generations old,
Right.
so that it wasn't our most current technology. And whether they were able to reverse engineer from that I don't know the question to. But that's been a problem with doing business with China for a long time.
Yeah, like you said, the reverse engineering part, and it was something that I discovered. In a former life, I was a analytical chemist, and I worked for Mitsubishi, which is another country that has very lax copyright laws. Um, and I remember going into a movie theater and seeing these video cameras up where they're simply just recording the movie. I'm like, isn't there a law against that? And then the guy that was taking me to the movie said, nope, no law. We're allowed to do that. So,
Yep.
um, so would you help as a lawyer? Would you help a company understand those practices so that they stay within compliance, or they know what the risks areas that they're taking?
Sure. So that's one of the things I do. What I focus on is I help build compliance programs inside of companies.
Mm-hmm.
So I call myself the nuts and bolts guy because that's really my expertise. Lawyers either they do what I do, or they typically will do internal investigations or negotiate with the government. If you're going to do the investigations, you need bodies. Frankly, you're going to have to go to a lot of places and talk to a lot of people. I'm a solo guy, so I'm not the right person for that. If you're going to sit across the table and negotiate with the government, I think you need to have been a government lawyer at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never worked for the government. I've always been in private practice, and I think that's a level. It's just a level of expertise I don't have. But what I have done is build compliance programs inside of corporations, and I know how to do that. And so that's what I focus on in my practice of compliance.
Right. Right. I mean, that makes sense. You know, they find the right guy for the right job.
That's what I try to be.
Yeah. Well, of course, leading back to the podcasting thing, though, it means that you get to network with a lot of different people and a lot of different skill sets. So
Absolutely.
If ABC company comes to, okay, that came out wrong, but anyway, if they come to you and say, hey, this is what we need, and you can say, honestly, hey, I don't actually do that, but I know this guy and I actually interviewed him. Why don't you listen to his interview and see if he's a fit for what you want?
You're absolutely spot on, and that's why people should come on my podcast and talk to me.
Absolutely. So, I think that the podcasting is a very valuable tool in today's marketplace.
I am in 100% agreement with you, Michael. I think every business needs a podcast. At least in America, over 60% of Americans have listened to a podcast. That's between 180 million and 200 million people. You simply cannot get that kind of exposure in any other medium. It's not going to replace television marketing or written, advertising, but it certainly supplements that. And it gives you the ability to do the things we talked about earlier. Showcase yourself as a subject matter expert. Reach out to customers or potential customers. Reach out to other subject matter experts so that you can learn from them. And then, develop your own audience through social media marketing. So for all of those reasons, I'm 100% with you that every business needs a podcast. Every entrepreneur needs a podcast. You need to get a podcast going to do all of the things that you can do in the social media realm now.
Yeah. Would you say that even if you don't have the time or patience to do your own podcast, but to get interviewed on as many podcasts as possible?
Absolutely. I would start there. I think we met through Podmatch. And even if we didn't, I'm going to shout out to Podmatch because they are exactly what their name says. They match up podcasters with people who want to be guests. And that's just one avenue that I use. But anytime you get the chance to go on a podcast, there are lots. I get PR pitches on a daily basis. So
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, if for those listening, if you can't afford a PR person, Podmatch is probably the number one spot to get interviewed several times.
I think I pay, I don't know, $20 a month, or I mean, it's relatively minor, and you get, like I said, I as a potential guest get matched up with a potential host like yourself. We exchange information to see if it'd be a good fit. We can then have a pre-interview call to see if
Yeah.
we want to move forward, and then we do the podcast. So it's a great service, and I think Podmatch has been great for me and the compliance community.
Yeah. Very valuable tool. Do you have a favorite story of an interview that you just learned lots of?
So probably two. I mentioned Rod Roddenberry. Well, he not himself personally, but his company has a podcast where they're going through every episode of every Star Trek, everything, TV, movies, spinoffs, you name it. And those guys I have met. And so when I was out in Los Angeles, I interviewed them. And we went through every original series, every TNG, every DS9. I mean, we didn't go through every episode, but it was like 50 years of Star Trek. And they know much more than I do. So that was just heavenly for me. That was probably my favorite just because it was full geekness. You could not have geeked out more. And that was probably my favorite. So,
yeah, it sounds like you follow all of the tracks.
I do.
So, I'll be honest with you right now. I have sitting in my DVD player, Picard.
Well, and I'm doing with two other people. We're doing our 15 top episodes from DS9.
Oh,
so
nice.
I love DS9.
Yeah, yeah. I like Avery Brooks. He was
Right.
great actor,
Yep.
and that was one of the things I always liked about the Treks is like, okay, yeah, the original Trek was very much a spaghetti western, but
Mm-hmm.
but some really excellent actors and thespians in the other Treks. So
Right.
yeah, they have a great way of rounding up talent. So, do you have a process to getting people onto your podcast? Since we're talking about rounding up talent, how do you round up the right guests for the right topic in compliance?
Well, one, I know everybody. So if there's some specific thing I want to talk about, I know, the top 10 people who will know about that thing, whatever that thing might be, whether it's a court case, whether it's a new law, whether it's a new regulation, whatever it might be. Two is I am a addict on LinkedIn, and I'm always reading LinkedIn. And if somebody posts something that interests me, I DM them and say, hey, that's an interesting idea. Would you like to come on a podcast and talk about that? Like this woman, she wrote 2 or 3 paragraphs on LinkedIn. And the question was, do you know your hotline number? And so I DM'd her and I said, this is fascinating. Tell me more. And she said, well, I used to do hotline training, meaning internal reporting training. And the first question I would ask the audience is, do you know your hotline number? And I thought, That's effing brilliant.
Wow.
Where did you learn that? And she said, I just thought it up. So I ended up interviewing her about that. She's not a lawyer, and she had a very different perspective than me, and just a regular person, or what we lawyers would call civilians. And she just said she started training that way, and people understood where she was coming from.
Wow. Do you know your hotline? Wow. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, I mean, I know you came out of the corporate world at one point, and did you know your hotline number way back then?
No, I didn't.
Well,
I did.
there you go.
I didn't. Well, one our home office was in Tokyo, and I was in Queen Creek, Arizona. So
Yeah.
So we're talking like how many different time zones right
Right.
there. So no, didn't know it. Yeah, it's like, and it probably would have been good to have.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that would be something that you want to make sure that for those of you listening, it's like make sure your employees have that hotline number to get whatever help they need, right?
Right.
So, is there a how to put this? Is there a favorite compliance topic that you like?
No, I like them all.
Yeah.
And sometimes I like some more than others, And right now, probably my favorite is data analytics because that's relatively new in compliance. So, how do you analyze the data that your company has, and then how do you make decisions about how to use that data? So that's something. I'm very focused on AI right now. What's the role of AI in compliance? How do you use AI? Is there a role? Things like that. How do you govern AI usage inside of a corporation? Those are just two of the hottest topics right now.
Yeah. Ooh, on the topic of AI, since we talked a little bit about IP. It's kind of a hot button thing because how do you determine whose IP the AI is when it produces, say a document or an image?
You're absolutely right. And this whole deal with Scarlett Johansson and The Voice, that's got everybody kind of up in arms. But the other thing is, how do you know the answer AI has given you is correct? Now, if I ask it a compliance question, frankly, I'm going to know the answer. But so I'll give you this example because it happened to me this week. I was writing about a trial that happened in the 80s, and the defendant, a gentleman, was married to the original Wonder Woman, Linda Carter.
Okay.
And I knew that. And it was himself and a co-defendant. And the AI report I got when I put in information I wanted about the trial said that he was the son-in-law of the other defendant, that he was married to the daughter of the other defendant. And I thought that's not right. And so I started doing queries. What's the relationship of Robert to Nancy? And it came back, well, Nancy was the daughter of so-and-so. And then I said, okay, what's the relationship of Nancy to the original Wonder Woman, Linda Carter? And it came back and said, well, they were sisters-in-law. And I said, this is not making sense. And I did one more query, and I get the answer, we are sorry. We gave you an incorrect answer. Robert Altman was married to Linda Carter. Our bad. And I went, wow. Now ChatGPT is telling you when they were wrong. But if I hadn't gone through those detailed additional queries, I wouldn't have gotten that answer. And if I hadn't known that defendant was married to Wonder Woman at the time, I wouldn't have ever started that. So, you have to do research. You have to see if what AI has told you is correct. And I mean, the big example in the States is there was a lawyer and he
Yeah.
had AI write some briefs and they were wrong and he got in big trouble with the court and we all went, ha ha, ha, how stupid. Well, except the learning point is you've got to check what they give you. It's a first draft of something. But if there's information in there, it's on you to verify it's correct.
Right. Right. Um, that's. I'd like to say this about AI, that if you're going to use ChatGPT for, or whatever else it falls in OpenAI, um, for something, make sure that maybe you should leave it to the expert to do that, to use that tool, because he knows how to do it better.
Well, here's what I've felt like, and maybe this will resonate with you. When I was 11, my parents bought my sister and I Encyclopedia Britannica for the first time. We never had an encyclopedia. And I thought it was the greatest thing I had ever seen. I literally had the world from A to Z at my fingertips. And I could read, I could study, I could write a report. I've been a geek a long time. So, I enjoyed stuff like that. And that's what I felt like with ChatGPT. But your point is exactly right. You have to double check it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you can't use it. But if there's a fact in there and you want to make your argument turns on that fact, you have to make sure that fact is correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I do remember Encyclopedia Britannica because I remember doing all sorts of reports and everything from it with all the volumes from A to Z. So
yeah,
yeah, yeah. That is my biggest thing with AI though is if you don't know to check how to check it, then maybe you should leave it to the expert or go to the expert with the question and or somehow fact check whatever it is that you're doing, and it doesn't seem like a lot of people want to do that. So, all right. So, if you wanted to create this world with your podcast, what would it look like?
Well, it would look like more people listening to compliance-related podcasts than there are. So, because I see, we've both been in corporate America, and we both understand business process. We're, I would say, more creative now, but doesn't mean we don't understand what a business process is and the purpose for a business process. Yeah. I see compliance as a business process. And if I can convince people this is just how you should do business, it will make you a better business and make you a more profitable business.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to communicate. And the more people I can communicate that to, the happier and better off that I am. The world loses $3 trillion annually to bribery and corruption. It loses $2 trillion annually to money laundering, theft through money laundering. Every day that I do compliance, I'm moving the ball forward, 2 steps, 1 step, 3 steps, whatever it is, a half a step. I don't care. But I'm part of that fight of those 2 really horrible worldwide scourges, because if we could put $5 trillion back into the world's economy, we could solve a lot of the world's problems. So I feel like I'm a part of something that's bigger than me, and I get to tell stories, get to talk to people like you, and I get to help businesses be more profitable. So that's what it would look like, but that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Well, honestly, on that one, a business that is making profit the right way is, in the long run, helping its community, helping its employees, and doing a whole lot more good than just whatever the basic product is that they're putting out there.
Right.
So, yeah. All right. Well, it's been great having you on. We just need one last item, and that is how to find the Compliance Podcast Network.
Sure. So the Compliance Podcast Network is found at www.compliancepodcastnetwork.net. You can find me on LinkedIn as Thomas R. Fox. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I'd love to talk to you. If you want to be on a podcast, let me know.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Michael, thank you so much for having me on.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.